Trevor.
Hello.
It's brilliant to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see
And
you.
fantastic to have you here. We had all these conversations and it has been so rich and so fruitful. Yes, would you, let's start just, why don't you introduce yourself and say just a couple of words perhaps about your, where you were born.
Yeah.
And your general grown up
Right.
situation.
Yeah. Well, I'm Trevor. I was born in 1947 and I lived in the Delves, an area called the Delves. I lived there, grew up there until I was 18. I got married and then I moved with my wife, and for the last 50 years we've lived in the Blakenhall area. We had small time living in Brown Hills as well in between. I worked on the railway at Bescott for about 3 or 4 years. Then after trying 1 or 2 other little jobs, because my wife didn't like me working the funny shifts, I ended up the age of 19 learning how to weld, and right up until I was 66 I worked as a fabricator welder on various sites, structural work and aviaries, building weighbridges and things, and also spent 20 years almost for IMI as a maintenance welder, repairer welder.
That's incredible. So you really went through that development that Walsall experienced from a heavily industrial place to what we have today.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was made over my working life. I was made redundant 5 times. But fortunately, it was at a time when there were a number of vacancies always seemed to be available, and the longest I was out of work was about a month. I always managed to get another job. And
so what were those industries that closed down in your experience?
there was a lot of there were a lot of visitors coming from the Far East, videoing what we were doing at the copper works, all with permission, like, even though I asked on a consultative committee meeting, why are they allowed to video what we're doing and then take it back? And they're undercutting us. But the response was, we had certain equipment that we could sell to them and install and make money, which was fair enough, but by the same token, they were coming over here and buying scrap and shipping it back to the Far East and making profit out of it. They were paying more than IMI were for scrap because their running costs were a lot cheaper.
Yes.
And eventually IMI was the last copper refiners in the country at the time. They had to close down, and there were quite a few hundred people lost their jobs. And the site itself, which was quite a big site.
Where was it located?
On the Darlaston Road, right next to the M6.
Right.
And now, the last year I would say, maybe a bit longer, it's been redeveloped into an industrial site with warehouses and things. It's going to be one of the biggest in the area, maybe in the Midlands. was derelict for a while. And another copper works which not far from here, Elkington's, IMI bought them out, and we knew they were going to close it down because there wasn't enough business for two, and they closed it down, and that site was derelict for quite a few years, quite a lot, longer than IMI. But now it's become quite, or it's on the point of becoming quite a big housing estate. They're actually going to be, they've been there, I would say, a year, 18 months, and they're probably going to be there another 2-3 years building. It's quite a big area. And it's improved the area, it really has. I mean, you ain't got the contamination now that you had with copper refiners. I would imagine that's why a lot of businesses closed down as well. Contamination
of water, or?
Possibly both, that and the air, the atmosphere and the ground.
Of course.
Because at the copper works, they used a lot of acid which seeped into the ground and contaminated it. There were fumes in the air, in the atmosphere. They used to have a monitor at the copper works to monitor the air pollution. And having the M6 right alongside, that didn't help. So it was always bad. It did say on a report that it was the most contaminated site in Europe. How they get that, I don't know. People must travel round finding out.
So what year did they close it?
They closed it at the end of, the majority of it, the refinery part itself. It closed down Christmas 1999, and it's only in the last few years that they've redeveloped it into warehouse units and things like that.
Right.
But there were a lot of people worked there when I worked there. It was a 24-hour operation, 7-day week, and it was very, very busy.
It sounds like lots of people used to work for it.
Oh, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess in the high hundreds, getting on towards 1,000, counting office staff and everything. In fact, I often tell people there were that many there, and me being on the maintenance, I used to have to travel around the site. And it was, you just couldn't remember people's names, so everybody is mate. Even now, if I see somebody, they tell me the name, but it's always, oh, hello, mate, because it's just a habit. One department, there was, because they had like 3 maintenance departments, the one department, everybody knew each other as George. It was easier to go around and say, hello George, you know, what's the problem, George? Trying to remember the names, there were that many people.
Yes.
But it was really friendly. It really was. It was dirty at times, a lot of fumes, but they looked after you.
Do you think people who used to work there, did they feel proud of working there?
I would imagine they did, yeah. I mean, the thing was, if you said to anybody, I work at the copper works, everybody seemed to know where you worked. That was it, James Bridge Copper Works on the Darliston Road, but you just said the copper works. It was that well known. And people, not just from this area, worked there. People had come from up Cannock and Wednesbury and that to work there.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think happened to all of those people who lost their jobs?
Well, I've got this saying that I started doing a long time ago, and if you see people who used to work there and they'd say, hello Bingy, do you know so-and-so's dead? And my expression was, I think it's the fresh air got to the lungs because there was fumes and things there, a lot of fumes and dust and everything. And it wasn't just copper they made there. There was a lot of dust sort of things, particles went through the filtration plant and ended up in bags, and it was like a white powder. And that used to be used for women's makeup. You know, you'd think, oh God, it's horrible stuff. It's just white, very smooth and really smooth, and they used to use it for women in the foundations and stuff. They'd sell it, and various other things they'd sell as well, byproducts. Right. But as I say, that was my expression, I still use it. If somebody's died or not, the fresh air must have got to the lungs.
Yes, yes. Sounds like there was lots of pollution there. Yeah. So what did you do after that? After
I left there, well, prior to that, I'd worked at a number of places learning to weld, as I say, partridges, construction. We used to do a lot of, I used to do site welding as well. If they needed any welding on site, I'd have to go out and do that. But after the copper works, in between partridges and the copper works, I forgot, I went to Allmakers at Cannock, where they do the big trucks, diggers and tipper trucks in, you know, for building sites. I worked there for a while, a short while. I had one or two small jobs in between. Always sort of walked from one job when I lost the job through redundancy. I always seemed to walk straight into another one, probably because I was qualified welder, I suppose. But my last 11 years, 12 years, I worked for Avery's at Smethwick. They used to do all the scales and various things, but all the small stuff now, it's all made in China. All that was left at Avery's, at the Soho Foundry, is the weighbridge department. They used to build the big weighbridges. And I was there for 11, 12 years. I probably would have still been there, but they had a small section that they shut down. And there were two chaps who could weld, but were going to lose the job. And they asked if I would mind retiring at 66, which I didn't mind. And one of them had my job.
Yeah.
But that's still going.
That's
that
brilliant.
section is, yeah.
Yes. So yes, quite a long development of industrial Walsall that you lived through.
Oh yeah.
So it sounds.
The railway. I worked on the railway. I was a fireman on the steam engines, and I passed my test on the diesels as second man. But then I got married, and my wife, she didn't like the idea of what she called the silly shifts, because obviously with engines on a railway, you can't all start at the same time. You have to leave at various times, so your shift always started at different times. And you never knew you knew in advance, but from one day to the next you could have a difference of an hour or 2 hours between your clocking on times. And she wasn't very keen on that. So that's when I left, and I ended up getting a job eventually as a welder. Yes. At Partridges. But that was at the Bescot, the railway, where I worked, which was just down the road from where I grew up. I grew up as a young kid. I could see it from my bedroom window. I could see the Bescot sidings.
Yes, you mentioned in our other conversations that you remember the steam engines.
The steam, oh yeah, I could see all the steam engines. I'm assuming it's still a big marshalling yard. It was probably Walsall, Bescot and Crewe were two probably big ones, major ones in the country. But it was a really big, they were one of the last steam depots. They started getting rid of the steam engines, and replacing them with diesels while I was there.
Right.
But yeah, I was on quite a few. I learned how to drive a steam engine, although I shouldn't have done. Because at the time when we were on shunting in the goods yard or disposing, which was when the engines had been out for a day or more and they'd come on, you had to clean the ashes out and everything and the smoke box and fill it up with coal and water and everything else, and then put it in the sheds ready for the next outing. The drivers used to let us drive one. we were supposed to drive. The drivers were supposed to move them up and down the yard, and we were supposed to do the manual work, or some of it. They would help, but the driver should have always driven the steam engine. And when you'd done 6 steam engines, you'd got your shift finished. But if you stopped and did some more, we used to get an extra hour's pay for each engine we did. So what we used to do, the driver would have one and the fireman would have one. So you get more engines done and get more overtime paid in, even though you didn't do much overtime. You know, sometimes you'd have to hang about waiting for the engines to come on site, but sometimes you'd do your 8 hours or whatever,
yes,
and you'd probably get paid for about 12. But you had to work. I mean, it wasn't dead easy, like, you know, you had to get underneath in the pits and clean it out and make sure everything was right. But yeah, I learned to, and also when we were shunting on the goods yard, moving the wagon, a train would come in and leave a line of wagons from wherever they'd been picked up. But then you'd be on the shunting shift, and you'd, with a guard, you'd divide the wagons into various other lines so they'd all be ready for another part of the country.
Amazing.
And the driver used to let us do that sometimes, either with the little shunting diesel or with a steam engine. And usually on the afternoon, evening shift, because there was a lovely little pub called the Bull's Head, and some of the drivers had sometimes disappeared into the Bull's Head while we were doing what we shouldn't have been doing. But it was all on the sidings, and we knew what we were doing. We didn't take any chances. It was, you know, we enjoyed it, and we made sure we were careful because we wanted to keep doing it.
Yes. Brilliant.
Yeah, it was a good job. Same with the welding. I enjoyed welding. I did it from about 22 till I was 66. I learned various types of welding, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I can't say there was a job I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed every job. But that was the people you were with, obviously. It made the job. There was a lot of banter going on between you. You could have a laugh. We were some of the places we were very sarcastic to each other, but it was all taken as it was meant as a joke. But yeah, industry closing down, getting computerised, some of it, and other going abroad because it's cheaper costs or what.
How do you think it all affected local communities, that change from being a very active industrial society to...
I would think it affected it quite a bit, because going back to when I was young, I mean, my dad, until he had to finish work through illness, he was always at work, and so were the men around the area, and they didn't have cars. You either had a bike or you had to walk to work or walk to a bus that went to where you worked. And of an evening, they'd come home, they'd have the meal. We didn't have a television when I left home when I was 18. We'd had a television about a year by then, But up until that,
What year was it? Sorry.
When I got married, 65.
Oh yeah. And the television.
The television, we probably had that in about 1964 from a company called Radio Rentals. We used to rent the televisions off them.
Yes.
Other than that, we used to listen to the radio. And even as a young kid, I can remember the one that's always stuck in my mind. On a Sunday evening, my mum would do our Sunday tea, which was a sandwich, bread and marge with a slice of cake in it. That was our Sunday tea until Instant Whip came out, and then I got sick of that. But the thing was, there was always a programme on the radio called Sing Something Simple, and they used to sing all the songs of the day, the melodies, not the new rock and roll, just the melodies. And I always remember the chap used to come on, and it struck me as funny even then. This is Sing Something Simple. This is a song for simple folk. And it's, you know, they could change that around it for simple folk. But it's just stuck in my mind. Round the Horn, Kenneth Horne, and comedy programmes that were on. I used to listen to all them. But a lot of people didn't have televisions, a lot of them.
No.
But as I say, the men used to go to work, and then every weekend, the place for most of the men, I would say most of the men, would be the local pubs. There was always a selection of pubs, and they would used to seem happy and they'd enjoy themselves, and there was never any violence. I mean, we was kids and we'd hang around outside, wait for a glass of pop. And sometimes when we got a bit older, I used to run errands and go in the outdoor and buy the beer for my neighbour in bottles. I shouldn't have been sold beer, but they used to sell it, yeah. And it'd be for my neighbour, and she used to give me a bit of pocket money. But yeah, the men always seemed happy. Another thing was, a lot of the men in the Delves area, and I would imagine over a lot of probably the country, was pigeon flying. They used to have two types of pigeons. The ones were for racing, and the others were what they called tumblers. And they'd loose them out and they'd just go round and round and up, and then all of a sudden they'd just roll down as though they'd been shot, and then they'd pick up and off they'd go again. And they used to think it was great, the number of rolls that they could do. But the other pigeons, as I say, they used to take them to races, and they'd have a clock to log them in when they got back, and go to the local pub or whoever had organised it to see who'd won, who'd come back the quickest. And gardening was another thing a lot of the workers did on the weekends or whatever. They'd all seem, a lot of them had greenhouses. And I always remember the chap at the bottom of our garden, whose garden ran up the back of ours. He used to go down every year with his wheelbarrow down to Bescot. There used to be a sewage farm, as we called it, sewage plant. And after they'd recycled it, they'd pump the whatever it was into this waste ground where the RAC depot is now, the RAC headquarters. And a lot of them would go there and dig it up because the tomato plants would be growing, because your seeds wouldn't get digested, so the plants would grow. And they used to come back with wheelbarrowfuls of tomato plants, and it looked like peat. It was the waste, but it had dried out. And they'd shovel that all over the garden and in the greenhouses.
That's amazing. You mentioned the market and how
the
that
market,
was
yeah.
so live.
Oh, that was Saturdays. That was it. Everybody from Walsall seemed to meet in the market. It used to be from the bridge, as it's known, both sides, over the Digbeth, which used to be called, originally it was a dyke path, which is how it got called Digbeth, because there was a dyke to cross the stream. And then it went up the high street, right up the top to where the church is, St Matthew's Church. And it used to seem to us as kids as though the whole of Walsall was there, because it was that packed. You'd had to push through sometimes to get through. There were that many people, and you'd have the stall holders shouting out what they'd got for sale. There was one chap I can remember as a young kid. As you go up almost to the top, he used to have tea sets and crockery, and he used to juggle it, shouting the people to show you what he'd got. He'd be juggling his plates and dishes. Yeah, and there was a caff up there and all. On the left-hand side, I don't know, it was Winds or something like that, I can't remember now. But that was a meeting place for a lot of the teenagers sort of thing. But eventually, in the 60s, the coffee shops started coming open, and, you know, people had the young ones had started using these coffee things, you know, with the record players and things like that.
That's brilliant. Just because we have to watch the time, kind of last, and we'll continue next week, I really hope. Last question, just to round it all off. How would you like to see Walsall in the future? Given all that richness and all that experience that you have from the past, how would you like to see it developing?
To be quite honest, I know a lot of people will probably say, I'd like to see it as it used to be, but it's never going to be that. It's always progression, it's always going to be different. One thing I would like to see, as I mentioned before to you, is the illuminations at the Arboretum. That, at the time, was very, very popular. And as I pointed out, Walsall had illuminations 4 years before Blackpool did. The original ones, they were candles in coloured jars. They didn't have the electrical ones till later, probably in the 50s, early 50s I think. And by then Blackpool would have had them. But it was popular, and people had come on coaches from other areas of the Midlands. It was always busy. But obviously the cost had a lot to do with it. And I don't know whether it's television and the internet probably stopped people travelling as well. So whether it would ever come back, it's still popular at Blackpool, but they've got the coast as well, the sea, and we haven't got that. But
what did it do to the community? So supposedly people from all over came to see
it. Yeah, it wasn't just this area. They'd come from other parts of the Midlands. They'd run couch trips to come here. Like once, I remember we went on a couch trip to Derbyshire. There was a place there. It's got Matlock Bath. They I don't know whether they still do it, but they have or did have illuminations along the river. And people, you could go on a couch from Walsall to there, and people went. So I would imagine they did a similar thing and come from that area to Walsall. Whether they would still come, I don't know. The problem is now, if people did want to come, the majority of people have got transport of their own. And that's the problem. Where you're going to park. If you do manage to get to Walsall, you've got to pay to park your car. They may introduce a free parking space in the extension, which I think they may have done before, but whether it would hold enough cars, I don't know. It's not that big. And as for parking in the town, there are some car parks, multi-storey and a few other smaller ones, but it's the cost. The cost of coming here, running your car to get here, then you find you've got to pay when you get here to park. You've got to pay to go in to see the illuminations. You've got to pay to drive back home, and people nowadays probably think it's too expensive. That'll probably kill it. But I would have liked to see that, and also swimming pools, the outdoor swimming pool in the Arboretum, that was always popular until they filled it in, built an aviary. But that was always popular, and now that the Black Country area apparently is one of the worst rates, the lowest rates in the country of children knowing how to swim. They're starting doing small pools that they can, I don't know whether they erect them, pump them up, whatever, and they're sending them round to different schools, I would imagine, a few weeks at a time, and they're covered over with like a big canvas tent. If they did something like that in Walsall again, they had one in Reedswood Park. I know there's the cost of looking after them and security, because of the night they're easy to get into these places, and you'd get some people who probably delight in ruining it for others. But if they could cover it over and or just put a fence round it to stop people getting in, but leave it open in the summer times, especially in the Arboretum, I would think children would love it.
That's brilliant.
It'd be, in my opinion, children ought to be able to swim. I didn't learn to swim till I was 32. My son and my daughter learned to swim at school, which is a good thing, because my son was on the ship that sank when he went on a school trip, and it got rammed in the Mediterranean. But he felt that confident, him and his mate, rather than waiting to be picked up in case the ship went down, they jumped off, and they were that confident they took the lifebelts off because they were too big. They were trying to swim and they weren't moving anywhere. But he learned to swim, and you know, I'm always grateful for the fact that he learned. I used to take him, my wife used to take him, but he also went with a school as well.
That's brilliant.
And he learned to, but a lot of them now, for various reasons, they can't swim, and it ought
That's
to
probably
be.
one of them.
I think it ought to be a lesson,
Yes.
not just maths and English and things like that. I think swimming should be a lesson as well.
Trevor, thank you so much. We will stop here for now.
Okay.
Amazing.
You're
You're just
more than welcome.
such a